The cameras were rolling, the audience was laughing, and Ellen DeGeneres was in her element, dancing through the crowd, spreading that infectious energy that had made her show a beacon of joy for millions. But then she noticed something that made her pause mid-stride. In the third row, a woman in her 50s was quietly whispering to the empty chair beside her, her lips moving in gentle conversation with someone who wasn't there. It should have been just another moment in another show. But when Ellen approached that woman and heard what she was saying, the laughter died, the music stopped, and 300 people discovered that sometimes the most powerful presence in a room is an absence filled with love. "He would have loved this part," the woman whispered to the vacant seat. "Remember how we used to guess which celebrity would cry during the interviews?" Ellen's heart skipped a beat. She'd seen many things in her years of hosting, but this quiet conversation with emptiness carried a weight that stopped her cold. "Let me take you back to how Margaret Sullivan ended up in that studio, talking to a ghost, and how her love story became the most unforgettable moment in Ellen Show history." It was a Tuesday morning in Burbank, and the Ellen Show was preparing for another day of surprises, celebrity guests, and feel-good moments. The audience had been carefully selected, as always, a mix of loyal viewers, contest winners, and people whose stories had touched the hearts of the production team. Margaret Sullivan wasn't supposed to be there alone. For 30 years, she and her husband Robert had applied for Ellen tickets together. Every year, the same hopeful letter, the same dream of seeing their favorite host in person. They'd watched every episode together, sitting on their worn couch in Pasadena, sharing popcorn and commentary about Ellen's guests. "Someday, Maggie," Robert would say during every show, "we're going to be in that audience, and I'm going to make sure Ellen knows about the most wonderful woman in California." Margaret would blush and swat his hand playfully, but secretly she treasured those words. After 33 years of marriage, Robert still had the power to make her feel like the young teacher he'd fallen in love with at a school board meeting decades ago. The letter that finally got them selected arrived on a Thursday in March. Margaret had screamed so loud that their neighbor Mrs. Chen came running over thinking there was an emergency. Robert had picked Margaret up and spun her around their small kitchen, both of them laughing like teenagers. "We did it, Maggie. We're going to meet Ellen." The tickets were for a taping 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to plan the perfect outfit, to practice what they might say if Ellen spoke to them, to count down the days like children waiting for Christmas. But 5 weeks before the taping, Robert Sullivan collapsed in their garden while planting Margaret's favorite roses. The heart attack was massive, instant. By the time the paramedics arrived, Margaret was already a widow, kneeling in the dirt beside the man who had been her whole world. Rose petals scattered around them like confetti at a celebration that would never come. The grief was suffocating. Margaret couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't imagine a world where Robert's laugh didn't echo through their house every evening. Friends and family surrounded her with casseroles and condolences, but nothing could fill the Robert-shaped hole in her universe. The Ellen Show ticket sat on her kitchen counter, a cruel reminder of dreams that had died with her husband. Margaret called the show 3 times to cancel, but each time she hung up before speaking to anyone. Something held her back, some voice that sounded suspiciously like Robert whispering, "Go anyway, Maggie, go for both of us." So here she was, in Studio 1A, occupying both seats, hers and his. She'd even bought his favorite candy, butterscotch drops, and placed them in the empty seat beside her. To anyone watching, it might have looked eccentric. To Margaret, it felt like keeping a promise. During the pre-show warm-up, when Ellen asked about special occasions, Margaret had remained silent. What could she say? "It's my dead husband's first Ellen Show?" Instead, she sat quietly, one hand resting on the arm of Robert's empty chair, whispering updates about the production, the other audience members, all the little details he would have noticed and commented on. Ellen was in the middle of her opening monologue when she spotted Margaret's quiet conversation. Something about the tenderness of it, the way this woman was clearly sharing a moment with someone invisible, drew Ellen like a magnet. There was love in that gesture, and Ellen had always been drawn to love in all its forms. During the first commercial break, Ellen made her way over to Margaret's row. She'd learned to trust her instincts about people, and something told her this woman had a story worth hearing. "Hi there," Ellen said gently, kneeling beside Margaret's seat. "I'm Ellen." Margaret looked up, startled. "Oh my goodness. Yes, I know. We're such big fans. We watch every single." She stopped herself, the present tense hanging awkwardly in the air. Ellen noticed the correction. The way Margaret's eyes immediately moved to the empty seat beside her. "We." That's when Margaret's composure began to crack. She looked at the empty chair, then back at Ellen, then down at her hands. "My husband Robert," she said quietly, "we've been trying to get tickets for 30 years. He passed away 5 weeks ago, but I couldn't come without him, so I brought him anyway." Ellen felt her throat tighten. In that moment she wasn't a talk show host looking for a good segment. She was a human being recognizing another human being's pain and love in their rawest form. "Would you like to come up and tell me about Robert?" Ellen asked softly. Margaret shook her head quickly. "Oh no, I couldn't. This is your show. I don't want to." "Margaret," Ellen interrupted, somehow knowing this woman's name without being told. "What would Robert want you to do?" The question hit Margaret like a gentle earthquake. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could almost hear Robert's voice. "Go on, Maggie, tell her about us." When the cameras came back on, Ellen did something unprecedented. She asked her producers to bring an extra chair onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ellen announced, "I want you to meet Margaret Sullivan. Margaret is here today with someone very special, someone who couldn't physically be here, but whose presence is felt by everyone in this studio." Margaret walked slowly to the stage, carrying the bag of butterscotch drops she'd brought for Robert. Ellen guided her to the chairs, 2 chairs, side by side. "Tell me about Robert," Ellen said, and her voice carried a gentleness that reached every corner of the studio. Margaret looked at the empty chair beside her on stage, then back at Ellen. He was my everything for 33 years. We met when I was 25, and he was this passionate young man trying to get the school board to fund an arts program. I was teaching 2nd grade, and I thought he was crazy for believing that 7-year-olds needed music class more than extra math worksheets." A small smile crossed Margaret's face. "He spent 2 hours that night explaining to me how music could teach math better than any textbook. By the end of the evening, I wasn't just convinced about the music program, I was convinced about him." Ellen glanced at the empty chair. "And he convinced the school board too?" "Oh, yes," Margaret laughed, and the sound was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Robert could convince anyone of anything if he believed in it deeply enough. He believed in me that way too. For 33 years, he made me feel like I was his personal miracle." The studio was completely quiet now. Even the camera operators had stopped their usual movement, afraid to break the spell of Margaret's story. "He was so excited about today," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "He had this whole plan. He was going to stand up during your audience Q&A and tell everyone that he'd married Ellen DeGeneres' biggest fan, and that watching your show together was our date night every single day." Ellen's eyes filled with tears. What would he say if he were here right now? Margaret looked directly at the empty chair, and when she spoke, it was as if she were translating a conversation only she could hear. He'd say, "Ellen, thank you for giving my Maggie a reason to smile every day, especially the days when I couldn't." Margaret's voice broke slightly, "And he'd probably ask if you needed any gardening advice, because he was very proud of our roses." That's when Ellen made a decision that would redefine what her show could be. She stood up and addressed her production team. "I want you to permanently reserve 2 seats in our audience. One will always be available for someone who needs to bring an invisible loved one. We'll call them the Robert and Margaret seats." Ellen turned back to Margaret. "And I want you to know that Robert is welcome here anytime. Both of you are." But Ellen wasn't finished. She walked to the edge of the stage and spoke directly to the camera. "You know, we do a lot of surprises on this show. We give away cars and send people on vacations and bring families together. But today, Margaret taught me something. Sometimes the most important person in the room is someone no one else can see." Ellen returned to Margaret's side. "I have something for you, Margaret, and for Robert." From backstage, Ellen's team brought out a beautiful arrangement of roses. Not just any roses, but the exact variety that Robert had been planting when he died. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. "These are for your garden," Ellen said, "because I think Robert would want his roses to keep blooming." But there was one more surprise. Ellen had her production team set up a small video screen facing the empty chair. "Margaret, would you like to tell Robert about today? I'll give you a moment." Margaret turned to the empty chair, and in front of 300 strangers and millions of viewers, she had the conversation she'd been wanting to have for 5 weeks. "Robert, honey, we made it. We're actually here, on Ellen, just like we dreamed. The studio is even prettier than we imagined, and Ellen is exactly as kind as we always knew she'd be." Margaret paused, wiping her eyes. "I brought your butterscotch drops and I told her about your roses. And Robert, I can feel you smiling." The audience began to respond, not with applause, but with something deeper. People were reaching across aisles to hold strangers' hands. Others were pulling out phones not to record, but to call loved ones they hadn't spoken to in too long. Ellen sat quietly, understanding that she was witnessing something sacred. When Margaret finished her conversation, Ellen spoke softly. "Margaret, I believe in love that transcends everything, time, distance, even death. And what you've shown us today is that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just finds new ways to express itself." Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out a small card. "This has my personal number on it. Not for publicity, not for the show, for those days when you need to tell Robert something important and you want someone to listen." Margaret took the card with shaking hands. "You'd really do that? For love like yours?" "Absolutely." As the show continued, something extraordinary happened. The empty chair remained on stage, and throughout the rest of the taping, Ellen would occasionally glance over at it and smile, as if acknowledging an invisible audience member. Other guests that day seemed to sense the presence too, speaking not just to Ellen and the visible audience, but to the love that filled that empty space. After the cameras stopped rolling, Margaret remained on stage for a long moment, looking at the chair beside her. "Time to go home, Robert," she whispered. "But we'll be back," Ellen promised. The impact of Margaret's appearance rippled far beyond that single episode. Within hours of the show airing, the Ellen Show website was flooded with stories from viewers about their own invisible loved ones. Robert and Margaret's seats became a trending topic, with people sharing photos of empty chairs at family dinners, graduations, weddings, all the moments when absence is felt most keenly. The show began featuring these chairs in every episode, not as a gimmick, but as a reminder that love creates presence even in absence. Other talk shows tried to replicate the concept, but they missed the point. It wasn't about the chair, it was about the love that made the chair necessary. Margaret became a semi-regular guest, not as a widow sharing her grief, but as a woman celebrating an ongoing love story. She'd arrive with butterscotch drops, update the invisible Robert on current events, and always end by saying, "Same time tomorrow, honey." 6 months after her first appearance, Margaret received an unexpected call. A young widower from Ohio had seen her on Ellen and reached out through the show. His wife had died in a car accident, leaving him with twin 3-year-old daughters who kept asking when mommy was coming home. "Margaret," Ellen said during their phone call, "would you consider talking to him? I think Robert would approve of you helping another heart heal." Margaret thought for a moment. "Ellen, Robert always said that love multiplies when you share it. Of course I'll help." That conversation led to Margaret becoming an informal grief counselor for the Ellen Show community. People would write in, sharing their stories of loss, and Margaret would respond with the wisdom that comes from loving someone so deeply that their absence becomes another form of presence. A year after her first appearance, Ellen surprised Margaret during a routine check-in call. "Margaret, I have something to tell you. The rose garden at our studio. The one where we film sometimes? We're dedicating it to Robert. There's going to be a bench there, and a plaque that says, 'For all the Roberts who taught us that love never leaves, it just changes address.'" Margaret was quiet for so long that Ellen thought the call had dropped. "Margaret, are you there?" "I'm here," Margaret whispered. "And so is he. Ellen, he says thank you, for all of it, for understanding that he's still here, still loving me, still making me laugh. You gave us our Ellen Show moment after all." Today, Margaret Sullivan still attends Ellen Show tapings, still brings butterscotch drops, still has quiet conversations with an empty chair. But now that chair is part of the show's permanent set, and Margaret's love story has become a beacon for anyone who's ever lost someone but refused to stop loving them. The Robert and Margaret seats have hosted dozens of invisible loved ones over the years. Veterans bringing fallen comrades, children bringing grandparents, spouses bringing partners. Each story is different, but they all share the same truth. Love creates presence that death cannot diminish. Ellen keeps a photo on her desk of Margaret and the empty chair from that first day. Not because it represents sadness, but because it represents the most powerful force in the universe, love that refuses to be contained by physical limitations. "Robert taught us something that day," Ellen said in a later interview. "He taught us that the people we love don't really leave us. They just take up residence in a different part of our hearts. And Margaret, she showed us what it looks like to keep loving someone with everything you have, even when you can't see them anymore." The lesson Margaret and Robert taught millions of viewers is beautifully simple. Love doesn't end when someone dies. It doesn't even pause. It just finds new ways to express itself, new conversations to have, new moments to share. Sometimes the most important person in any room is someone no one else can see. Because when you love someone with the depth that Margaret loved Robert, their presence becomes permanent, their chair never truly empty, their voice never really silent. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you find yourself on a talk show stage, introducing the love of your life to the world, even though no one else can see them. That's not just television, that's proof that love creates spaces that death cannot empty. And in those spaces, conversations continue, dreams are shared, and hearts remain forever connected across whatever distance separates them. Because love, real love, doesn't acknowledge death as an ending, it only acknowledges it as a change of address.